Many thanks to be back here in Davos and to see you all in person after 2 years without this gathering. For half a century, the World Economic Forum brought the global community together to exchange ideas, insights and solutions on some of the world's most important difficulties. Today, we need the spirit of Davos even more. Sorry. Yeah. President Putin's war on Ukraine has shattered peace in Europe. It is really a game changer. Not security, but for the global order. NATO has two fundamental tasks in response to Russia's aggression: support to Ukraine and preventing the war from escalating. For many years, NATO and NATO allies have supported Ukraine. States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and also Turkey. Providing equipment and training for tens of thousands of us. We see the difference this is making every day on the battlefield. Since Russia's invasion, we have significantly stepped up our with billions of dollars of weapons and other assistance to help Ukraine uphold its right to self-defense, enshrined in the UN Charter. NATO's main responsibility is to protect all allies and prevent this war from escalating, causing even greater tension. We may have been shocked by Russia's brutal invasion, but we should not trust. This invasion was one of the best predicted acts of military aggression ever. In NATO, we shared intelligence. We made the intelligence public for many months to warn about Putin's plans. Russia's attack on Ukraine is part of a pattern over many years, where Moscow uses military force to achieve its political aims. The destruction of Grozny, the invasion of Georgia, the annexation of Crimea, the bombing. Since the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014, spending and invested. Since the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014, NATO has been adapting and preparing, with spending and invested in modern capabilities. We deployed combat-ready battle groups in the eastern part of our alliance, first time in our history. We increased the readiness of our forces and established new defense domains, including space and cyberspace. Russia invaded Ukraine again this year. NATO was ready. We deployed additional forces to the east of our alliance, over 40,000 troops under direct NATO command, backed by significant air and naval assets. We doubled the number of groups from the Baltic to the Black Sea. And we have 100,000 troops on high alert, ready to respond to and to defend every inch of NATO territory. This is deterrence, to remove any room for miscalculation in Moscow. Not to provoke a conflict, but to prevent the conflict and preserve peace. Last December, President Putin presented an ultimatum to NATO. He demanded a legally binding treaty to rewrite the security architecture in Europe, to re-establish spheres of influence, to force to withdraw from the eastern part of our alliance, and to end NATO enlargement. He wanted less NATO borders and launched a war. Now he's getting more NATO on his borders and more members. And Sweden's decision to apply for NATO membership is historic. It demonstrates that European security will be by violence and intimidation. All allies agree that NATO enlargement has been a great success, spreading freedom and democracy across Europe. So I'm confident that we will be able to find a way to address all allies and welcome NATO's closest partners into our family of free nations. NATO is vigilant in the Baltic Sea region. Allies have increased their presence. We have stepped up exercises and deployments, and for the first ever, a US amphibious ready group has been placed under NATO command. The close bond between NATO and the European Union. Between NATO and the European Union. European security and transatlantic security are deeply intertwined. Today, close to 600 million Europeans live in a NATO country, and 93% of the EU population protected by NATO. The ever closer coordination between NATO and the European Union has been critical for dealing with the current crisis. As you just heard from Ursula von der Leyen, NATO allies and the European Union have imposed unprecedented sanctions on Putin's war machine. Countries from Switzerland to South Korea have joined us and also applied sanctions. And hundreds of international companies have pulled out of Russia. These massive sanctions remind us of one of the important lessons from this conflict: that we should trade long-term security needs for short-term economic interests. The war in Ukraine demonstrates how economic relations with authoritarian regimes can create vulnerabilities. Over-reliance on the import of key commodities like energy. Risks created by exporting advances like artificial intelligence, and weakened resilience caused by foreign control over critical infrastructure like 5G. This is about Russia, but also about China, another authoritarian regime that does not share our values and that undermines national order. International trade has undoubtedly brought great prosperity. I, and many of us here today, including Børge Brende, have worked hard to promote a more globalized economy. We must recognize that our economic choices have consequences for our security. Freedom more important than free trade. The protection of our values is more important than profit. At the NATO summit in Madrid next month, NATO leaders will make bold decisions to continue to strengthen and adapt our lives for this more dangerous and the conflict in Ukraine has underlined NATO and are working with our like-minded partners around the world. To defend our values and promote peace and prosperity. Spirit of Davos, I count on you too. Thank you. I count on you too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. I just wanted to follow up on your last points related values. I think you said something to the effect of that we have to be willing to face the realities and pay a price for our, and what have you done in the past, in hindsight, that you would have done differently, and how will this affect future policy? Are you stream 2 indirectly?
Yes, not only indirectly but directly. I think we all have learned a lesson. That of course, and you and I, we have actually been active in Norwegian heavily and strongly in favor of free trade agreements, integration with the European Union, globalization of the economy, and more global trade, a more global economy, free prosperity and wealth to all of us. But the problem is that it has a price. Because some of this trade, some of this economic interaction with authoritarian regimes is undermining our security. And then we have to choose security instead of vulnerability and over-reliance on authoritarian regimes. So this should free trade in natural gas, meaning we can buy as much gas from Russia as we want. That's wrong. It's dangerous. It provides Russia with a tool to intimidate, and that has been clearly demonstrated now. I regret to say it, because I remember back in the 1990s, I was Minister for Energy in Norway. We actually thought that we could expand the European supplies from Norway, from North Africa, and from Russia together. Trade with China, of course, there are huge benefits. I'm not arguing against, but I'm saying that, for instance, the control over 5G networks is of vital security importance. And we cannot say that in the interest of profits and free trade, we just open up those networks also for suppliers that actually are not reliable when it comes to our security. NATO's technological edge, that we have always been in command of the best and most advanced technologies, has been fundamental for our security. And now we see new and disruptive technologies, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, autonomous systems. This is share that technology. We may earn some money, but we also more important than free trade, and protecting values is more important than profits. That's a lesson. And protecting values is more important than profits. That's a lesson I think we all have to take into account, and meaning that it has to organize our economies.
Thank you. Secretary General, you also said that what Putin got as a result of his war on Ukraine, NATO. Is this developing into like a Vietnam War situation for Mr. Putin? Do you think he regrets this? I will not speculate about his feelings, but he made a big strategic mistake. Because actually I believe that one of the purposes, one of the stated purposes of the invasion of Ukraine was to get less NATO on Russia's borders. And in the legally binding treaty, President Putin in Russia sent to NATO in December, they want us to sign, it's clearly stated no more NATO enlargement. And now he gets more NATO enlargement. And he has not achieved his strategic Ukraine. The plan was to take Kiev, to decapitate the government and to control the country. He has been forced to withdraw his forces from Kiev and the north. Russian forces have been pushed out of the Kharkiv region, and the offensive in Donbas is moving very slowly. I'm not predicting that no one can do that, but I'm only saying the obvious thing, that Russia did not achieve its goals in Ukraine. This plan was a short military operation. It's a long, costly war for Russia. We welcome the fact that Finland and Sweden for NATO membership. I'm confident that we'll be able to address the concerns that have been expressed, and that we will be able then to welcome Finland and Sweden as members of. Just to follow up, Secretary General, on Finland and Sweden, two countries that you know very well and was neighbors of Norway, where you were Prime Minister for a decade. You're welcoming them, and I think that's very welcomed in Stockholm and Helsinki, but not in Ankara. So how will you solve the challenge from Mr. Erdogan?
With President Erdogan on Saturday, and we have also seen all the public statements, and Turkey has expressed concerns related to terrorism, to their, and then we have to do what we always do in NATO, and that is to sit down and address concerns when allies express concerns. I'm confident that we will be able now, as we have done so many times, to find a way to, as full-fledged members of our alliance. I know Finland and Sweden well as a Norwegian alliance. I know Finland and Sweden well as a Norwegian. They will contribute to our collective defense, to our. It will be in particular importance for the Baltic region. But let me also highlight that, or say that I also recognize the importance of addressing the concerns that Turkey has raised. Turkey is an important ally. Their strategic geographic location is important for us, bordering Iraq and Syria. They have been key in the fight against ISIS, Daesh. Black Sea nation, close to Russia in the Black Sea. We have to remember that no other NATO ally has suffered more terrorist attacks than Turkey, and no other NATO ally hosts more refugees than Turkey. So we have to find a way forward, and I'm confident that we will do so. In the meantime, we need to make sure that we also address some of the concerns that Finland and Sweden has raised about this interim peace. Why we also have now increased our presence in the Baltic region, an amphibious ready group under NATO command, and more presence in that region.
Thank you. You also said, Secretary General, that of course you cannot predict the outcome of the war in Ukraine. I think many participants also will ask themselves the question, can this end in a full-fledged war between Russia and NATO?
NATO allies and NATO provide support to our valued partner Ukraine, as we have done actually for many years since 2014. Stepped up now, of course. But the ability is to protect and defend all NATO allies. And therefore we need to make sure that this brutal, heinous war doesn't escalate to a full-fledged between NATO and Russia. And that's the reason why we made it clear that we will support Ukraine to uphold the right for self-defense enshrined in the UN Charter, not be part of the war. We will not send in NATO troops on the ground and be directly involved in the war. Support, yes, but not be directly involved. Why? We so significantly have increased our presence, military presence, especially in the eastern part of the alliance. There are 30% more US troops in Europe now, on the direct NATO command in the eastern part of the alliance, significantly, and we have significant air and naval presence. As this is to make sure that there is no room for any miscalculation, so they don't think about attacking a Baltic country, or that the whole of NATO will come to defense of any ally. So then we are preventing war, preserving peace. Strengthen our deterrence to preserve peace.
Thank you. Last question. We just heard the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, talk about Europe's response to the war by unity and support. How do you feel about the prospects for a closer cooperation between NATO and the security and defense matters moving forward?
So I strongly believe in cooperation between the European Union and NATO, and Ursula von der Leyen and I, we meet regularly. I meet President Charles Michel and in different ways, and I'm proud that since 2014 we have been able to lift NATO-EU cooperation to and when Finland and Sweden joins, 96% of the people living in the European Union, they will live in a NATO country, protected by NATO. 6% of EU territory will be NATO territory. So we share much of the same population, we share the same neighborhood, we share the same challenges. Of course, it makes all reason to work closer together, NATO and the European Union. And we also see during this crisis how EU has been instrumental in many ways, providing support, imposing sanctions, and then also coordinating United States, United Kingdom, and others. And I also welcome EU efforts on defense. Because as Ursula von der Leyen just mentioned, for instance, the fragmentation of the European problem for Europe and for NATO. In the United States, there are many battle tanks and one type. In Europe, we have quite few battle tanks and 9 different types. A lot of extra costs for maintenance, education, and so on. And this is the case on almost every capability. That is too much fragmentation. So the European Defence Fund, PESCO, by the European Union, will have to provide new capabilities, will have to overcome the fragmentation of European defence industry, and will hopefully also help to increase defence spending. That's something NATO has asked for. We very much welcome it. The only thing we have to make sure is that the EU efforts do not compete with NATO or duplicate NATO, because NATO will remain the cornerstone for European security. 80% of NATO's defence expenditure come from non-EU NATO allies. It's about geography. Norway, Turkey in the south, and in the west, the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, they are of course critical for the defense of Europe. And it's about politics. Because Europe and North America will not only weaken NATO, it will divide Europe. So we need Europe and North America together in NATO, working together with the European Union.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.